Hey stranger, so I wanted to make another video tonight, both because I'm really trying to get into the habit of making more regular videos, and also because I am way too caffeinated to do my homework right now. So, I thought I'd make a video, and the topic that I wanted to make a video about, because it's the question that I get asked the most by people, which is how to come out as non-binary. And, why is my internet so slow right now? Yeah. So, how does one come out as non-binary? It is different than coming out as transgender, if you're coming out as a trans girl or you're coming out as a trans guy, because it's something that most people haven't heard of, and so I feel like as much as trans visibility in general is absolutely atrocious in that it doesn't exist most of the time, and so coming out as trans, regardless of your specific identity, is always going to be a difficult experience, and you're always going to have to do quite a bit of explaining. I feel like for non-binary people specifically, because you're kind of wanting to exist as a gender that most people don't even think exists, it is somewhat more complicated, and you kind of have to do a bit more educating in that way. And so I guess I'll just talk about like how I came out to my parents, or like advice that I have about coming out to parents and friends, because those are the two things that I've been really successful with. Work and school are always a bit more complicated, and I might touch on those in another video, but I'll just cover family and friends for now. So when you're coming out to your family, is actually probably the most difficult people to come out to, because they're more personally invested in you and your identity and your life than anyone. So it's not that they don't have good intentions or anything like that. It's just they are the most invested in you as a person. So they will be the most impacted by it, most likely, out of anyone that you're going to come out to. And so I would just say to make sure that you're prepared going into that. Obviously, safety is a major concern. So if you feel like you are in a kind of home environment where you don't know if you would be safe to come out, like really kind of consider the pros and cons of that before you do. Like, you don't owe it to anyone to come out. Like, you don't owe it to anyone to be open about your gender identity. Like, if it's something that you want to do or something that you need to do, you can always feel free to keep it to yourself. I'm not saying that I recommend that. I'm just saying that if that's something that you need to do or something that you want to do based on your personal situation, then that doesn't make your gender identity any less valid. And that's a perfectly valid thing to do. So if you feel like you're not safe, then either consider, like, weigh the pros and cons in regards to your safety and your well-being before you decide to come out. And if you do that and you still decide that it's really important to you to come out to your parents, then I would just say, like, as sad as it is, that you should really have an exit strategy planned out. Like, have a bag packed, have someone that you can call to come pick you up if things don't go well. I hate that I have to say that, but it is a reality for a lot of people. There are a huge amount of homeless trans youth, and so if you think that your parents are really just not going to handle it well, then just, and you feel like you really need to go through with it, I would just be prepared for the worst in that situation. I hate that I have to say that, but that is the reality in a lot of cases. And so, but if you're not in that situation and you feel like your parents will be able to, you can negotiate with them, then I guess I'll just move on with that situation, because I was not personally in a situation where my parents were going to reject me, and I don't personally know anyone who has come out to their parents in that situation, so it's not something that I can specifically speak on. But coming out to your parents in a way that you just want to kind of explain it to them, I would start off by kind of laying the groundwork before you involve yourself in it. Like, if you have friends who identify as non-binary, if you know public figures who identify as non-binary. I'll put a link in the description to a list of public figures who are non-binary. Just at media, things like that, articles, like there have been several articles in the newspaper. I can link to some articles down below. Just kind of expose your parents and your family to non-binary transgender media and the idea of non-binary trans people. Maybe kind of, if you get the opportunity to bring it up in conversation or explain it in relation to another person, like that you have a friend or a pen pal or an internet friend or something, and you can kind of use them as a way to explain the whole thing to them first. Then you can kind of get a feel of how they would react to it before you say, like, hey, I am this thing that you've never heard of. So I feel like in any coming out situation, it's kind of good to lay the groundwork and kind of bring it up in a way that is not related to you to see how your family reacts to it, and kind of determine how you need to go about approaching that first. I did a lot of that, but obviously I've talked about it before on my blog and in previous videos that I didn't come out as non-binary first. I came out as a trans guy first, and then kind of only started talking about being non-binary after I'd been out as a trans guy for a while and decided that that wasn't for me. But yeah, so once you've kind of like laid out the groundwork and you've kind of explained to your parents in a peripheral kind of way what non-binary is, then I would still just be prepared to arm yourself with resources, because there are a lot of situations where your parent might be more accepting and more accommodating of someone of that identity who is not their child, and then they find out that you are that, and it's a totally different story. That's something that I have seen a lot. Parents being very accepting of their child having trans friends, but then they find out their child is actually trans, and it's like a totally different thing. And again, it's not because obviously it is a bit transphobic, but it's honestly just because they're more invested in you than they are in your friends. So it's less to ask of them to be understanding and supportive of someone that they don't have in their life, or someone that they didn't raise. I'm not trying to sympathize with transphobic parents or parents who are really parents who reject their children or anything like that. Like, that's not at all what I'm saying, but it's just for a lot of people, and in my personal experience, coming into your parents is a real adjustment period for them. And I know that a lot of people hear that a lot, and that's not what they want to hear. They just want to hear how to make their parents understand them right away. And unfortunately, I do know a few people with whom that happened, where they had really liberal parents who were really up on queer stuff and kind of just like P-flag mom archetype, and they just accepted them off the bat, and it was no issue. And honestly, if that is your experience with your parents, then bless you, and I hope you have a great life. But so I really hope for everyone watching this video, if you're planning on coming out as non-binary, that can be your experience. But in reality, that's not most people's experience, coming out to their parents. So so when you go to approach it with your parents, I would just say arm yourself with resources, arm yourself with psychological information about it, articles about it from reputable sources. Try to find things that have been written in newspapers, things that are from media sources that your parents would think is legitimate. And I don't want to differentiate between what is legitimate media and what is illegitimate media, but just something that is coming from a source that your parents would otherwise respect, because it's not that, it really sucks that your own words when talking to your parents and your family is not always enough to convince them. I mean, how shitty is that they're your own family and your own words straight from the horse's mouth are sometimes not enough to make them believe that it's a real thing. But they're just when it comes to family reactions, and especially parental reactions, a lot of the time it's not that they don't love you, and it's not that they don't want to support you, it's that they're scared. And I know for my parents personally, my mom had heard the suicide statistic. My mom had heard the statistic of harassment and sexual violence and homicide and things like that. And so she didn't want me to be trans because she didn't want me to have a more difficult life. And most of the time, when parents are hesitant to accept the reality of it, is because they don't want to accept the reality that you're going to have a more difficult life. Like, if they really love you, then that's usually why it's difficult for them to come to terms with. So when you just come out as non-binary or you just come out as trans, like, most of the time you're coming out and you really just want to get the ball rolling. Like, you want people to start respecting your new name and your new pronouns and everything like that. Like, you want it to just happen like that. And the fact is that as nice as that would be, and for some people that is the case, that's not how it's most likely going to work out. You coming out, especially to your family, is not one conversation. It's something that you will be having several conversations about. So if you think, like, I mentioned it to them once and they're not on board with it, they're still, like, ignoring my pronouns or even, like, acting like I didn't even talk to them about it, like, that's pretty common, like, both from my experience and the experience of several other people I know. So, like, be prepared for several conversations. Like, it is a serious adjustment that they have to make. And so if you're not forthcoming about it and if you're not enforcing, like, this is really what's happening, then they will try to kind of push it aside a lot of the time and just be like, oh, that was just a phase, or that was just something they worked through, you know, because it would be easier if that's what it was. Like, that's the thing. Like, no one wants to have a child who has some sort of identity or some sort of issue that's going to make them be discriminated against or that's going to lead them to have a more difficult life. So, like, when you are first introducing it to them, like, there's a chance that they will just try to make it not a big deal and in whatever way that they can. So it is something that you will have to be quite insistent about at first. And the other thing is that if your parents don't react well at first, like, that doesn't mean that they won't come around, and it doesn't mean that that they're never going to understand or they're never going to be supportive. I mean, I had a lot of issues with my parents or my family when I first came out, because I was just getting out of having a whole bunch of issues with depression, and my family had really kind of had quite the experience dealing with me during my teenage years. And so for them, it just seemed like one more thing. Like, oh, like, you're depressed and you're this and you're that and now you're trans too. Like, what the hell? But it just takes them a while to understand that is the reason, and that is what it is. It's just a fact. And so, like, I had a lot of issues with my family for probably the first year and a half after I came out. And I honestly still, like, occasionally one of my parents will call me by the wrong pronoun or something like that. It doesn't happen that much anymore. And it doesn't really bother me that much anymore because I know at least they're trying, and I know that when they do that, they feel bad. So as long as, you know, they're being respectful and they understand that my identity is not something that's going to change, that's really all I want from them. And now, at this point, about 3 years after coming out, my family is extremely supportive. I have the best relationship with my mom that I've ever had, and she honestly handled it I don't want to say, she had the hardest time with it out of everyone in my family, and I now have a better relationship with her than I did before I came out. Obviously that's not going to be the case for everyone, but I'm just saying that is, like, if you had a really loving relationship with your parents, if your parents really cared about you before you came out, and there's not some religious issue, because, like, my family is not religious in the traditional sense, and so that wasn't an issue for them. But I know sometimes if parents are really deeply conservative or really deeply religious, then it can be another story, or it can be more difficult for them to come to terms with. And I can't really speak to that experience personally, unfortunately. But if you had a loving relationship with your parents, if your parents really cared about you before you came out, they're still going to care about you afterwards. And it's going to take them a while to reconcile that part of your identity and kind of weave that into the perception of the person that they love. But it will happen eventually. Like if your parents loved you before, they're not going to stop loving you. Hopefully. So yeah, my advice is just that you need to give your parents time. I mean, don't give them slack. Like, don't just like bring it up one time and then don't mention it again, or don't mention it when they get your name wrong, or don't mention it when they get your pronouns wrong. Like, you do need to kind of be on them about that stuff, as long as that's something that they're somewhat receptive to, and you do need to keep enforcing it to them at first that this is a real thing that you are serious about. But as like if your parents have a difficult time with it, then you kind of really need to point them in the direction of some resources. Honestly, maybe encourage your family to get counseling. Like that's always a good option, because it is a really difficult thing for them to do, and it's not that it's your fault. It's not your fault, but it's just your parents and your family oftentimes has to kind of deal with the loss of the person that they thought you were, or the person that they thought you were going to be. And it's not until they kind of start seeing you as the gender that you identify as and realize that that is the person that you always were, that they'll be able to come to terms with that. Because that was the thing with my family. Like, once I came out and I started living as my identified gender for a year or so, my mom said to me, like, I can't resist this anymore, because I can see how happy you are, and you're happier now, and you're more yourself now than you were when you were living as a gender that I thought you were. So once people start to see that the gender you identify as is who you are and is who you always were, and that it makes you happy, then it kind of becomes easier for them to reconcile. But until that point, like in the first few months especially, it's going to be really hard. And so going into it, I just advise you to be prepared for that. It's not fair, and I don't want to, like, obviously it's more difficult for you than anyone, and I don't want to be like playing the devil's advocate if your parents are really horrible to you about it, but I'm just speaking of the moderate situation where your parents aren't totally on board like right off the bat, but they don't kick you out or anything, that you need to be prepared for that reality. And yeah, they really come around in the end most of the time. But as far as getting back to the non-binary specific aspects of it, I have no idea how long this video has been running on for. Oh, we're almost at 20 minutes. Wow. But getting back to the non-binary specific aspects of it, I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation, which I will link to in the description, for coming out to parents specifically about being non-binary. I will also link to, in the description, the Life Outside the Binary Ally Resources section for friends and family. I guess I didn't really touch on friends, but maybe I'll have to make another video about that. So just really, it's difficult enough for parents to come to terms with their child being trans, and they will try to like resist it or act like it's not really happening. And if you're coming out as non-binary, then it's all the more easy for them to do that if that's what they're going to do, because it's something that they've never heard of, and so it's really easy for them to think that it doesn't exist. So you really need to be prepared to present your parents with resources from reputable sources about non-binary people, things that have been written about non-binary people from an external perspective, and also like personal accounts written by non-binary people. Again, like, not to plug my website, but Life Outside the Binary has tons of resources about that, and I try to keep track of every article or resource that I come across of that nature. So you can check out all that stuff in the description if you need resources. If I can say if you take anything away from this video, just please arm yourself with resources, like psychological resources, social resources, everything to prove to your parents that it is a real legitimate thing. And also consider seeing a gender counselor, because honestly, a lot of the time having it explained to your parents by like a recognized professional can really make a difference in solidifying that it's not just a phase that you're going through. It is something that the medical and psychological community recognizes, and it is something that is valid from an outside point of view. Yeah, I expected this video to be cheerier, but I guess I'm just kind of giving you cautionary tales. But if you have any other questions, or if you'd like me to make a video about another topic, or if you'd like me to speak more on this topic, or if you have any other questions about coming out or coming out in different situations, then definitely leave your comments and questions in the description. I'd also like to just take a moment at the end of this video to plug my social networks, because I've decided that I really need to start using social networks that are not Facebook and Tumblr. I recently deleted my personal Tumblr because it's just taking up way too much of my life, and so I won't be on there except to be administrating life outside the binary. So my Twitter and my Instagram are the two things that I'm trying to connect with people on, and so I will put my Twitter here. It's just my name, Lane Patriquin, and I will put my Instagram here, which is Newt, spelt N3UT. And yeah, if you'd like me to make a video about any other topic, or any questions, comments, concerns about the content of this video, please let me know in the comments down below. Peace out.